The air in the family estate felt unusually still for a gathering meant to celebrate. There was no laughter, no warmth in the room, just a thick tension that hung over us like a dark cloud. As I walked into the living room, the familiar sight of my family members seated around the grand dining table hit me like a punch in the gut. My mother, Trinity, sat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning over everything with that typical, unsettling scrutiny. Bella, my older sister, sat next to her, her posture impeccable, a smile on her face that seemed both sincere and falsely triumphant. I could feel the unspoken judgments already in the air. My family, once again, had found a way to remind me of my failures. "Caroline, darling," my mother cooed in that voice of hers that always made my skin crawl. "I got you something. I thought it might help you." Before I could even respond, she handed me a small, elegantly wrapped gift. It wasn't the first time I had received something like this. I knew exactly what was coming. The wrapping paper came off with a swift pull, and inside was a delicate box. When I opened it, my heart sank. There, tucked inside, were two things: a subscription to a dating app for older women and a book titled Dying Alone, The Struggles of a Woman Without a Partner. I could feel my hands trembling as I tried to mask the disgust rising in my chest. My mother's eyes gleamed with that same cold satisfaction she always wore when handing me these gifts. It wasn't a gesture of love, but of control, a reminder that I was the odd one out, still single, still failing to meet the family's unspoken expectations. "Thought it might help you find someone," Bella chimed in, her voice sweet but dripping with the unspoken judgment we both knew too well. She always had to make sure that her words stung just enough to let me know I wasn't living up to the image they had set for me. I forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Thank you." But the words felt hollow like the gifts themselves. I had learned to keep my emotions in check, to remain calm, to avoid rocking the boat. But as I stared at those two items, the dating app and the book, something inside me snapped. The years of quiet resignation began to weigh too heavily on my chest. I had been controlled, belittled, and pushed into a mold I was never meant to fit. As I closed the box, I didn't feel sadness or gratitude, or even anger. I felt something else entirely, something cold, clear, and final. A quiet, steady rage began to build inside me, a quiet awareness that I had been living my life in the shadow of their expectations for far too long. The anger was like a flame, starting small but growing with each passing second. It was there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. I shifted my gaze towards Bella, who sat there with her smug smile, as if the world revolved around her perfect little life. There was a time when I envied her beauty, her career, her picture-perfect existence. But now, I only saw her for what she truly was, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong, the one who would never understand the suffocating weight of family expectations. "Thank you," I repeated, my voice now colder, firmer. It was a statement, not a thank you. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of defiance in the pit of my stomach. The silence I had carried with me for so long had become a prison, and I had reached my breaking point. I wasn't going to let this happen again. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. The room seemed to freeze. My mother's gaze sharpened, and I could feel her eyes drilling into me, expecting something more, something that aligned with her idea of the obedient daughter. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not anymore. Bella opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her, my expression colder than I had ever allowed it to be before. "I'm fine, Bella." "Thank you," I said with finality. I turned towards my father, Richard, sitting at the end of the table. His eyes remained fixed on the glass in front of him, but I saw a subtle shift in his expression, a barely perceptible nod. I wasn't sure if it was approval or simply resignation, but it felt like something had finally shifted in the atmosphere. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I wasn't the passive, silent daughter anymore. I had made my first stand, and no one could take that away from me. The tension was palpable, but for the first time in a long while, it wasn't just about the gifts. It was about something deeper. The battle for my own identity had just begun. The silence in the room seemed deafening as the weight of my actions hung in the air. I knew the consequences would come, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if I was finally seeing the family for what they truly were, a force that had kept me small, hidden, and silenced for too long. And I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. The evening was far too quiet. It was as if the entire house had been holding its breath, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. My fingers fidgeted with the edge of my napkin as I sat at the dinner table, the clinking of silverware and low chatter of distant relatives doing nothing to ease the tension in the air. My family had gathered, just as they had for years, to celebrate what they considered to be the epitome of success, Bella's perfect life, her perfect wedding, and everything that came with it. As if on cue, my mother, Trinity, picked up her glass of wine, her eyes fixed on me as she leaned in. "So, Caroline, when will we be seeing you settle down?" The question was sugar-coated, but I could hear the underlying judgment in her voice. It was the same old question, the one that always felt like a poke, a reminder that I was the disappointment in the family. The familiar lump rose in my throat, but tonight I wouldn't choke on it. "I've already settled down," I said, looking around the table. My voice was calm, deliberate, but my heart raced with the weight of what I was about to do. There was a pause. I could feel the room go still, the soft sound of my words lingering in the air. Bella's eyes widened slightly, her smile faltering. Trinity's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line as she processed what I had just said. "You're... what?" Bella asked, her voice dripping with disbelief, her perfect little world suddenly cracking at the seams. "I'm married," I said, the words feeling both surreal and liberating. "I've been married to Nate for months." The table fell silent, save for the sound of my father, Richard, shifting in his seat. He didn't say anything, just stared into his glass of wine as if my words hadn't hit him like a slap across the face. He never truly cared, never really listened, just stayed neutral as always. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Trinity's voice finally broke the silence, and the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "You're lying," she said, her voice low and controlled, but there was no hiding the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You've disrupted this family gathering with your ridiculous claims." "I'm not lying, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "You just never bothered to ask. You never cared enough to know the truth." Bella snorted, her laugh sharp and cutting. "This isn't funny, Caroline. What are you trying to prove? This is ridiculous." But the cold anger inside me was growing, and I wasn't going to let it go any longer. "What's ridiculous is how you've all treated me like I'm invisible unless it fits into your perfect little narrative. I'm not going to play along anymore." The tension in the room shifted, palpable and thick. My mother's eyes narrowed, but it wasn't just anger that I saw. There was something deeper, a sense of control slipping through her fingers. And that realization felt like a victory. I glanced over at Preston, Bella's fiancé, who had been awkwardly silent throughout the entire exchange. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open, as if he didn't know whether to get involved or stay out of it. But he wasn't the one I needed to focus on. It was Bella, my mother, the ones who had always held the reins. "I don't care about your approval," I continued, turning my gaze back to my mother. "I never did, but I'm done with being your puppet." That hit hard. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. The game was over. The rest of the dinner passed in strained silence. No one knew what to say, but I could feel the weight of the growing tension pressing down on each of us. The quiet disapproval of my mother and sister was palpable, but it was also oddly freeing. For the first time, I wasn't apologizing for existing, for living a life outside the confines of their expectations. But the night wasn't over. As dinner concluded, I made my way to the living room. I needed a moment alone, But as I passed the hallway, I noticed something, an envelope tucked into the corner of the entryway table. I pulled it out, recognizing the handwriting. It was an invitation for a wedding. My wedding. My heart sank as I flipped it open. It was addressed to Bella, just like the others, but I hadn't given her an invitation. In fact, no one in the family had received one. Just Bella. I couldn't help but feel a rush of anger surge through me as I realized the depth of their manipulation. They had known, of course, but kept me hidden, out of sight. They had excluded me from everything that mattered to them, including my own wedding. But now I had the truth in my hands. I stormed back into the dining room, holding up the invitation for everyone to see. "Here's the truth," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. This wasn't just about me being invisible. This was about you making sure I stayed that way. The only person who knew about my wedding was Bella. She got an invite, but none of you did. The room went dead silent, the impact of my words settling in. Bella's face turned white with shock, while Trinity's lips trembled with rage. My father didn't move. He never did. I saw it now, the cracks in their perfect facade. The game had changed. And this time, I was the one holding the cards. Preston stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "Bella, I had no idea," he stammered, but Bella's face twisted in fury. "That's enough." Bella snapped, her face flushed. She was furious, but the power she usually held in her perfect little world was slipping away, and it felt so good to watch. I turned to my father, who had remained silent throughout the entire scene. "What do you think of this, Dad?" I asked, the words biting in my throat. "Is this the family you wanted me to be a part of?" There was a moment of silence before Harrison Sterling, my father's business partner, who had been watching quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "I think it's time for some honesty," he said, his voice calm but heavy with disappointment. This isn't how a family should act." That was the final straw. The truth was out, and the cracks in their world had become undeniable. But just as the chaos began to rise, I realized something. I was no longer the person who had to stay silent. I was done apologizing. The truth had been revealed, and now I would wait to see if they could live with it. The tension in the room was palpable as I pulled up the video footage on my phone. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room, casting an eerie shadow on the faces of my family. They were all there, still stunned from the previous revelations, but this was different. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the proof that they couldn't deny. I hit play. The first image that flashed on the screen was of the front door to the house. It was a typical day. No one could have guessed that this innocent moment would lead to the unraveling of everything. The camera captured Bella walking toward the mailbox, holding a stack of envelopes, wedding invitations to be exact. I didn't have to watch the whole thing to know where this was going. The next few seconds showed Bella stopping at the mailbox, looking around, and then tossing the invitations into the trash without a second thought. My heart clenched as I watched the betrayal unfold in front of me. There it was, plain as day. The evidence I needed to prove to everyone what I had known for so long, that they had never cared. They'd always dismissed me, discarded me like an afterthought. As the video continued, the room grew quieter, the tension becoming almost unbearable. My fingers were trembling as I held the phone in front of them. I could see the shock in Preston's eyes as the truth hit him like a freight train. He looked at Bella, then back at me, his face filled with disbelief. He opened his mouth to say something, but stopped. What could he say? Bella had lied to him, just as she had lied to everyone else. I glanced at Bella. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with anger and panic. She was the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one everyone admired, and now here she was exposed for the liar she was. "You're lying!" she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "This is just some trick. A setup." I shook my head, the words coming out colder than I intended. "It's not a trick, Bella. It's the truth, and I'm done pretending it's not." Bella's anger bubbled over. "You're just doing this for attention. You want to ruin everything. I didn't flinch. I'm not ruining anything. I'm exposing the truth. Trinity, my mother, who had been eerily silent until now, finally spoke up. Her voice was shaky, but there was still an attempt at control. What kind of game are you playing, Caroline? This is family. You don't do this. You don't throw accusations like this around. Maybe it's time someone did. I shot back, my voice rising in defiance. You've all been lying to me for years. You never wanted me to be a part of this family. I was never good enough, never important enough. The silence in the room was suffocating. I watched as Trinity's mask cracked. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. Her perfect little world, her image of the perfect family, was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Bella, too, was speechless, her anger now replaced with a growing sense of panic. But the storm wasn't over. Why didn't you tell me about this, Caroline? Preston asked, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me you were married? I didn't need to tell you anything, I said, meeting his gaze. None of you needed to know. But you all wanted to keep me small, keep me in my place. Preston's face twisted with guilt. He looked at Bella, his eyes searching for answers, but there were none to be found. He looked back at me. I didn't know. I had no idea. I turned away, focusing on the screen as the video continued to play. Harrison Sterling, my father's business partner, was quietly observing the entire scene, his face an unreadable mask. He had been quiet for most of the evening, but now he stepped forward, breaking the silence. I've suspected this for a long time, Harrison said calmly. His words were like a slap to the face of my family. I warned Richard about Bella. She's been manipulating things for years, pulling strings behind the scenes, controlling everything to suit her own needs. I saw Richard's eyes flicker with unease. For the first time in years, he wasn't the silent bystander. His facade of indifference was slipping away, revealing the cracks in his own world. Bella turned to him, her voice breaking. You knew, she demanded. You knew, and you didn't do anything? Richard didn't answer. He just stared at her, a distant, unreadable expression on his face. The room was a war zone. I could feel the anger radiating from Bella and Trinity, the shock from Preston, and the disappointed silence from Richard. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. They had kept me in the shadows for too long. They had controlled my life, manipulated every moment, and I had let them. But not anymore. As I looked around the room, at my family's shattered image, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had done it. I had exposed their lies. But with that victory came a hollow feeling, the realization that this was the price I had to pay to be free. My family would never be the same. They could never go back to the way things were. And neither could I. I turned to Bella, whose face was streaked with tears and rage. You can hate me all you want, but the truth is out. You can't change that. Bella's face crumpled as she sank into her chair, her hands trembling. You've ruined everything, she whispered. You've ruined me. No, I replied softly. You did that to yourself. Preston stood there looking lost. I can't be part of this anymore, he said, his voice breaking. I can't marry you, Bella. Not after this. Bella's sobs were quiet, but the pain in her eyes was enough to pierce through me. She had lost everything, her perfect image, her fiancé, and the control she had once held over all of us. But as her world crumbled, I realized that mine was just beginning to take shape. I had won. The truth had been exposed. But at what cost? The family I once knew, the family I had fought for, was gone.